Ready, baby? Action!
Oh, what was my line?
Do you embarrass easily? Don't worry, it's all part of growing up and being British.
Have you ever been climbing and thought, man, I wish there was a bolt here? Today, we're going to retrobolt a climb.
Hello, is this thing on?
This is my friend Aiden, and among many accomplishments, he has put in a number of first ascents in the Tahoe region. Aiden, what is retrobolting and how is it different than rebolting?
Well, Bobby, retrobolting, I suppose, is where you're actually adding a bolt. Where rebolting is that you're just taking out old mank and putting in something fresh that's going to be safe and live for many, many, many years. Retrobolting is the idea of adding a bolt to a climb.
So why do most people consider retrobolting bad or a no-no?
Additionally, it's the idea that the first ascensionist gets to decide how the climb is protected and basically sort of throws down the gauntlet and says anybody else who does this climb has to do it in the way that I did the climb. And that may be, like, you've probably heard of the Bacchyurian, right? It's super, super scary climb. Well, like, you would probably, they would probably put a contract out on you if you went up there and added bolts to the Bacchyurian. And to a lesser degree, people feel strongly about just adding bolts to any climbs. Some areas they were done in a style where there's just, I think it's kind of a shame because there's whole areas that just have lots of really scary climbs that nobody can do. And I think really the secret to an area is having it kind of mixed, having climbs that are safe, easy, having some scary climbs. Sugarloaf here's got some scary climbs still, and they should not have bolts added to them. But there are climbs, I think, they could be made better if they had a couple of bolts.
So in what situations do you think it's okay to add a bolt to a climb?
Only if the first ascensionist agrees to those bolts being added, or the first ascensionist decides themselves that they're going to add a bolt. That's really about the only justification. I can't get behind just going up and looking at a route and going, this climb would be great. Everybody else could do it if we added a bunch of bolts to it, because it's a slippy slope, right? You do that and everything gets bolted down to the lowest common denominator, and you're really sort of taking away one of the most important aspects that is climbing, which is some fear and some risk. It could not have as many bolts as you like, and it will be a very scary climb. It doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a dangerous climb. It just might mean you'll be taking long falls into space, but that's sort of the game that was played when it was put up, and you should top rope it or do whatever you need to do so you can give that a go. And it may be scary, but that's kind of the game sometimes. I'd probably put up this, this is Happy Face 10C, I don't know, 20 years ago. Obviously, it kind of wants to go sort of a direct finish, and I kind of went off left and up this crack, which is kind of grungy. And I thought, if I just put one more bolt up there, you'd have this really cool face finish. I mean, you can still go left into the crack. So I'm going to put the bolt in, and I think it will enhance the climb. Certainly, it's not going to make it any easier, but it will just give a different finish in this particular case.
What if the first ascensionist is not around to ask, say they've passed, or they are no longer climbing, or they're no longer in the area?
I think it's really hard. I would probably not be the one that's putting up those bolts in that situation. I mean, I think there are, there's some situations where there's just whole crags which have gone into disuse and they haven't been climbed up for 20, 30 years. And there are those times where people kind of come back to those crags and they're like, there's a couple of bolts, but there's no history of it. Nobody really knows what went on there. There's maybe some evidence that there was one climb back in the day, but nobody knows what it was called, who did it, when it went up. You look around, you're like, this could be a really nice crag. And I think there are those times when people are like, we're going to develop this crag. And if you've tried and exhausted your opportunity to try to find out anything about it or get permission, then that's been done. And most of the time, I don't have an issue with that.
Aiden, do you have any other thoughts on retrobolting, what we did today?
Make it good gear. If you're going to put something in, put good gear in. It'll last a while. But I do always think that one of the things I've always liked to stick by, especially in traditional climbing, if there is gear to be had, then gear should be placed. I don't like the idea of just putting bolts up next to where there are gear placements. I mean, I just led this thing right here. I just put in 5 pieces of gear, which was probably excessive. in a little itty bitty crack, but that was definitely part of the joy of this climb. And you could have added 2 bolts below the first bolt that's up about 25 feet, but you'd have just sort of ruined the climb, really. You know, it doesn't need retrobolting. You just need to learn how to place those little bits of gear. And that's really an enjoyable part of climbing. So I think you have to be careful about that one too. So Bobby, what about this scenario? You reach out to the first ascensionist who put up a route. You put it up when he was 27 and some wicked hard man. There's 75-foot runouts or 30-foot runouts, or it's an X-rated route. And now the guy's hasn't climbed for 40 years and he's 65, some old geezer. And he's like, oh, yeah, bolt the thing up, you know. Well, I mean, that's a tricky one, right? Is because some people would say, well, you know, you're still going to ruin this classic climb. And are they entitled to actually change their original hardman routes? That's, I think, a difficult one. And I think that one you have to use some judgment. I think in the case like of the Gutenberger Wall across from Consumnes River, where you would reach out to Bob Branscombe, I guess there might be some people that would complain that Bob shouldn't have allowed it or given you permission to put bolts on that. But I look at it.
I've already heard them complain.
Yeah. But, you know, I've climbed around here since 92, and I climbed at Consumnes River a lot. I never, ever went over onto that far wall on the other side because it was manky and dirty, and the bolts were terrible, and there was not enough of them. And I was like, looks like a sort of a nice, pretty area. And since it's been retro-bolted, I've been over there a couple of times, and it is delightful. It is beautiful, and it is a great place for, you know, 5'7", 5'8" climbers to go over and have just a spectacular time. So I'm like, it's a win-win all around. So, but I do think, you know, there's like a climb on the other side. What's it called? Oh, shoot. 10BX route. Rick Sumner. Rick Sumner was actually the guy that did the lead. Tapestry, 10B. First bolt's 50 feet up.
Look at the camera.
First bolt's 50 feet up.
Okay.
Very heady.
Let's start over with the story
Okay.
of Tapestry.
All right. So we were talking about, you know, is there routes that even if you were given permission, should they be bolted? And, you know, on Sugarloaf here, there's a bunch of safe routes, and there's some medium routes, which is most of them, and there's a few scary routes. And probably maybe the scariest route at Sugarloaf is called Tapestry, 10B. It's probably 120 feet, and there's 2 bolts on it, and then I think maybe a knob you can sling, and another one that you can pretend to sling. But it is a very brave, bold piece of climbing that he put up on lead with these long runouts. And I once did it after top roping it a bunch, and, you know, I was glad to have done it and not really interested in doing it again. But, you know, if he came and said, whatever, go and bolt the thing up, I'd say, no, leave that, because, you know, there is going to be those few climbers that will come here over the years that are going to be like, yeah, at one point in time, I want to do Tapestry. I want to prove that to myself. And if we just take all those climbs, even if they've got that permission to, you know, rebolt it. I mean, unless the guy shows up himself with a drill and like he rebolts it, then I think you should leave those. So there are those exceptions. Nothing is clear. I think really what you're trying to do is trying to maintain the spirit of the area you're working within. Like all the routes I put up, I'm always trying to look at an area and say, is this place better for my route? You know, and if I think I can justify that, then I think it should go in. It's a good route, and you're adding to the area. And I tend to bolt my routes in sort of alignment with the ethic of the areas I'm at, which at Sugarloaf is not over bolting them.
Does adding bolts prevent somebody in the future from doing it the original way and having that same experience that the first ascensionist had? If there's bolts there, does that prevent them from having that experience?
I mean, to a certain extent, I suppose, right? If Tapestry actually had, you know, you could probably easily put 10 bolts on Tapestry. And if you were just like, okay, I clip bolt 1 and bolt 9, it would seem like a different climb. It would seem like you're contrived and you're just risking death as you're climbing past perfectly good bolts, and it would seem like to remove what is the legend of that scary climb. So yeah, I think it would.
Thanks so much.
Subscribe to the thing below. Is that what we do now?
I don't say that.
Oh, no, okay, sorry.
Yeah.
You don't subscribe to the thing below.
Yeah.
Maybe there isn't a thing below.
You can if you want to. Thanks so much for joining us. These, of course, are just our opinions. We'd love to hear what you think in the comments below. Any last quotes there, Aiden?
They are just opinions, but of course they're right. So there's that. But,
I can't put that in there. My mom watches these.
Hello, Mum.